Thanks everyone for joining us. As far as women in entrepreneurship goes, there's some great news. Women have been outpacing men when it comes to starting businesses. I think the statistic is in 2007, women started 44% more businesses than men, which is fantastic. The not so fantastic news is that we're starting businesses that aren't scaling. So even though female-owned businesses represent 30% of the businesses out there, they only represent 13% of non-farm payroll sales and 11% of unemployment. So, there's a lot of different speculation as to why, these female-owned businesses aren't scaling, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have an all-star panel from entrepreneurs to media that speak to hundreds of entrepreneurs to the folks that finance these businesses to help us understand scaling up in small business and how women can scale up. I'd like to start by introducing Amelia Antonetti, who is CEO of Sassima. She's a serial entrepreneur, and she's grown over a dozen companies, selling her first business when she was 19 years old. One of the businesses includes Soapworks, and she has authored 3 books on entrepreneurship. She is a regular on Fox News and Fox Business. She's actually the official voice of small business for Fox, and has been seen on everything from NBC, CNBC to the Oprah Winfrey Show. So that's Amelia right there. Then we have Susie Crippen, who is the co-founder and creative director of J Brand Jeans. And these are the jeans that Vogue magazine listed as one of the 7 essential pieces of clothing that you need in your closet. So that's huge from Vogue. J Brand Jeans have been worn from everyone from Kate Moss to Beyonce, and Susie sold her stake in J Brand in 2010. So we also have Karin Klein, who is the business development director at Bloomberg, and Karin focuses on investing in and advising small businesses. And prior to Bloomberg, she was a venture capitalist focusing on a variety of media and technology companies, from Associated Content to Buddy Media, BuzzFeed, The Huffington Post, and Thumbplay. And she actually got her start as an entrepreneur herself in the education space. We also have Laurel Touby, who is the founder of Media Bistro, and that's a site that's devoted to community building and social networking, and is just the monster when it comes to media and journalists and related professionals. Media Bistro has more than 1.2 million registered media professionals that use the site regularly.
Oh, even more now.
And before starting Media Bistro, Touby was a seasoned journalist and editor, and she also successfully exited the business for $23 million, so she can tell us a thing or two about that. And finally,
I'm wearing J Brand jeans.
We're not at the participation section yet. Finally, we have Kimberly Weisul, who is an editor-at-large at Inc. magazine, and before Inc., she was a senior editor at Business Week and won all sorts of prizes for Business Week with her coverage. And she's also the co-founder of One Thing New, which is an email newsletter that is for busy working professionals. And so let's give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. So before we start talking about women, businesses, and scale, I want to get a sense of who's in this audience today. Just raise your hands if you actually own a business today. Now raise your hands if you want to start a business. And for those of you who own a business, raise your hands again if that business has actually cracked 1 million in sales. And finally, raise your hands if you are seeking venture capital or one day plan to seek venture capital. So this is giving us a lay of the land of who we're talking to, and I think the whole idea is so we can cater our conversation to help you and help you grow your business. I wanted to start with you, Kimberly, and talk a little bit about just what you're seeing as a journalist. You speak to hundreds of entrepreneurs every year. You've got that ability to see the macro playing field. What's going on with women entrepreneurs?
Well, as Monica pointed out, women entrepreneurs are starting businesses at much faster rates than men are. The businesses, as you said, are not scaling. We're not 100% certain why that is. I mean, I look at the Inc. 500, which is the fastest growing companies in the country. WPO, the Women's Presidents Organization, also has a list of the fastest growing women-owned companies in the country. And the lists are almost mutually exclusive, which is pretty sad to me, frankly. The explanation that we hear very often for why women-owned companies aren't growing as quickly is that women are less likely to seek venture capital and equity, any form of equity financing. I think access to capital is a big part of this, but if that were the case, if that were the largest and only determining factor, I think we would see women doing much, much better in services industries than they are, because services companies generally can't get an infusion of equity capital. So if you take that piece away, you would expect to see women doing better there relative to men. I think it has more to do with access to high-level mentors and champions myself. I mean, I think that for a lot of women entrepreneurs is the missing piece. And I've just started my own company, but I know just in my career, it's been very, very important to me to have someone that I could look to and say, okay, she did that before I did, right? Just my partner now in my company, her kids are older than mine. She's had a fantastic career through the whole thing. And I can look at her and say, oh yeah, it's possible to have 2 kids in school and still have a great career and start a company, right? And if you don't know someone who's done that, no, I'm not saying it's easy, but she's not dead, right? So I think that finding the person, we'll talk later about how to find these people that you can really look at, and you can ask them honest questions about how did you get through that period? You know, what did you say when possible investor asked you about childcare? You know, when you can talk about those things openly with someone who's been there and done that, I think it's a huge help.
I think there's also this weird bias, and I'm not sure if it's only by women or also by men, but maybe more women have it, of borrowing against borrowing. They're almost afraid to borrow money because it feels like it's something that weakens you, that makes you weak. You know, oh, I had to borrow money, you know? And actually, it's important to borrow money in order to use that leverage to expand your business. So I think there also might be a mentality around that. Have you guys ever experienced that feeling of, oh, I wouldn't want to borrow money? Yes? No?
She's like, bring that money over right here.
Okay, not you, but raise your hands if you've ever experienced that feeling. Yeah, okay.
It may come back to a risk aversion, which we'll talk about, and risk and fear and how that plays into women in business. Karin, we're talking about money, so I want to talk to you. When it comes to financing small businesses, what are you seeing?
So it's interesting. The first thing I'd say to people who are in the audience, since it looks like many of you will be at one point thinking about starting businesses or growing the businesses you have, is apply. I mean, seek out the financing, because as a venture capitalist, you know, Gina Davis spoke to us yesterday, and she said the numbers of 1 in 5 was the ratio she saw of women to men in the television arena, you know, both behind the screen and then in front of the screen. As a venture capitalist, and this is anecdotal, but we might have seen 1 in 20. So that women weren't even applying. And we had some really high-profile, interesting companies led by female founders, Ariana Huffington and Betsy Morgan, who was the CEO of Huffington Post, and then Buddy Media, which was a husband and wife team. You know, so there are examples. And then you look at the people on the panel here. I mean, we're starting to see some really interesting, talented, executive entrepreneurs, you know, so there are examples. It is possible. So the first thing I'd say is apply. And then in terms of funding, I'm also seeing that there is a movement more toward helping and supporting women. There are definitely a number of organizations that focus solely on helping women. Golden Seeds, Springboard, which is an incubator, and a bunch of the incubators, like I volunteer for Techstars, I think Laurel does too, and First Growth. So they proactively reach out to female entrepreneurs, and you know, other examples of places where you can turn are some of the corporations. I'm on the board of L'Oreal's Women in Digital. They're providing funding. There's the Dell Women's Initiative. And then when it comes to the more formal, traditional venture capital, the numbers aren't great. I mean, as a female, I would be one of the few in a room at many of the venture capital meetings. All that said, though, there are a lot of people who want to support women, want diversity. I'd lead with, it's a good idea that you have, not that I'm a woman and I'm alone. I think that will resonate much more because everyone wants back incredible, interesting ideas. So apply. That's my encouragement.
So
find a great idea and apply.
One of the things that pops in my mind as I hear you speak is, women just aren't going out there and seeking the capital, and it makes me think about, well, what is the motivation of women when they're starting these businesses? I think back to a lot of the people I know who have business training, and the reason that they start a business is actually for flexibility, and it's not necessarily even with the mindset of growing the next, billion-dollar company. And so, as women, we face a lot of additional challenges in terms of balancing a family, balancing husbands, and the needs of everything that revolves around the house. Amelia, you have kids, you've had a husband, you've had dozens of businesses. What gives? How does it work?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that the word balance was created by a man. So stop making that as a objective, because balance is stagnant. If you actually look up the word, that's what it means. None of us are aspiring to be stagnant. So the proper analogy to use is ebb and flow, created by Mother Nature, ebb and flow. And your life is going to go back and forth between the different buckets that you create for yourself. As long as you don't touch down for a long period of time, you are in balance. So I think a lot of times we put this really unrealistic expectation on ourselves of what our life should look like when we're partners and mothers and career people and business owners and all of this stuff. We put these visions in our head that unless you actually talk to somebody who's a little bit ahead of you, who actually does. I have a teenager and I have a tot. I've got an 18-year-old son and I have a 5-year-old daughter. I've had up to 11 businesses at one time now. My business partner, I run several different houses at the same time. And we are also investors and stuff. So we got a lot of moving parts. And I had to really start redefining some of the definitions that were out there, and then really doing a check and balance to going, well, does that even make sense for me? So I am not the kind of mom that I read about in, with the pearls and the vacuum and the cookies and all that. That's not the kind of mom I am, and I don't want to be. And when I started my first business at 17, and I sold it at 19. I became a mom when I was in my very early 20s. And I had to really get comfortable with saying, I'm not that kind of mom. Because in the PTA, they'd be like, oh, aren't you one of those like working kind of things? Who you have a hobby, right? I'm like, yeah, I have a $57 million hobby. And even after I sold my first company, and I was one of the green pioneers, and here in Forbes magazine, they're like, oh, this girl started this company out of her garage, and she took it, to $150 million, and she got lucky. And I'm like, if I was a man, you'd never say I got lucky. You don't get lucky at 150. And there's a lot of sacrifices along the way. So I think the first thing is to really get comfortable with what you want and what that's going to look like. And it doesn't have to look like any of the pictures that we grew up with, because those are not necessarily what we actually want. I'm a different kind of partner. I'm a different kind of mother. I'm a different kind of business owner. I mean, one of my passions when I started Soapworks was I didn't want any woman to commute to her child. And I said that publicly on Oprah. Boy, the media had a blast with that. Because I didn't think a woman had to choose between being a great mom and being a great business owner. So I was going to change the model. And we built a big fishbowl in the middle of Soapworks, and we homeschooled from our office. So not a single one of my employees had to make that decision between, do I stay at home? And we raised them like a village. And it was seriously not well received in the business community because it was very different. But I also was a CEO at a time where there wasn't a lot of other women sitting at the helm of those kind of size companies. But it gave me an opportunity to change the model and really push back, which my business partner and I continue to do now. We're turnaround specialists. We're one of 4 women that go in and turn around a business in 120 days or less. It's not easy, and it for sure is not comfortable, but redefining the roles allows the next woman that are coming up through the channels to be able to also redefine it for her. So what I tell you when you hear this word balance and who you're going to be and what it's going to look like, make your own pictures and push back, because if it works for you, you know what? You got my vote.
Susie, I feel very fortunate to know your story and how you got started, and I think it's something that a lot of people here should hear. I'd love to hear you tell the story of how you started J-Brand.
I started J-Brand, it was kind of an accident. I was 40 years old. I was a wardrobe stylist. I was $68,000 in debt. I had no health insurance. I had no savings. I lived in an apartment, and I had a 12-year-old car. And I was actually dating my future business partner, and he said, he had been in the denim business, and he said, I think I'm going to start my own company. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to start a denim company, you better do a clean dark jean, because nobody's doing a clean dark jean, and you better make sure that jean doesn't get baggy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because everybody wants to look good 24 hours a day. So he started asking me questions about denim. And the next thing I knew, he handed me a blank denim thing, like an unwashed denim, showed me how to do the wash. I worked on the fit. I was the fit model. And, you know, I've told Monica the story. I've told countless people this story. Like, when I put that first sample on, I knew I had created something that I saw in my head. I visually saw it in my head. I have no design experience. I cannot draw. You know, it was like the best fluke in the whole wide world for everybody. I put that jean on, and I knew I had something different, and I knew I had what I wanted. And so I shifted. I literally, like, I'm not kidding you guys, when I was 34 years old, I was a waitress. And I was a waitress for a good portion of my life. All the years I lived in New York, I was a waitress. When I was 44, I was worth, several $1 million. So you can literally change things up. But you have to make choices. You have to make strong choices. You have to take risks. So I decided, or I chose, once that sample was on, I just said, I'm creating a jean empire. I didn't know how to do it. I'd never been in business before. I read every single book I could get my hands on, and I became absolutely mono-focused. I didn't do anything else except work on my business. I didn't show up for birthday parties. I didn't go away for weekends. I didn't do anything. I was 100% focused on my goal. 2 years later, my friends would call me up and go, where are you? Because it took us a long time before anybody even knew who we were, what we were. And I was like, I'm creating a jean empire. And they were like, oh, God, shut up. And I was like, all right, I'll come to your birthday party next year. So I was very, very focused. I had a goal. I knew what I wanted to do, and I just stayed on that track. And I didn't let anyone or anything tell me that I could not do it, because I believed so wholeheartedly in my product. We had people return stuff. They were like, this is too tight. I don't understand. And I was like, okay, well, you don't know what you're talking about. and I didn't say that, but I was like, okay, we'll just take it back. So I would go out and look for the stores who understood the kind of woman that I was, what I wanted, because I knew if I wanted it, a whole bunch of other women wanted it. And, oh, look, turns out I was right. So, and then after everything really, really hit, like, I have a really, really good story to tell you. Can I tell a really quick, really good story? You go for it. I used to be wardrobe stylist, so W Magazine invited me to this luncheon, and I wasn't even fancy. I did, like, frozen craft lasagna commercials. That's the kind of commercials I did. That's the kind of work I did. So, which is a great job, but it wasn't fancy. So I was invited to this luncheon, and my partner at the time, Jeff, said, what do you mean you're going to a luncheon? We have to go downtown. I was like, I'm going to that luncheon, and I'm going to meet a stylist at that luncheon who's going to put our jeans on her client. That's what I'm doing. Go to the luncheon, sit down, start talking to this girl who's next to me. So what kind of work do you do? And I kind of fudged it. I was like, I do commercials. Didn't really. And she was like, oh, I work with Motley Crue, and I do this, and I do that. She was reeling off this thing. And she said, so what are you working on now? And I said, well, I just started a jean company. And she said, are those your jeans that you're wearing? And I said, yes. And she said, I noticed those the minute you walked in the door. She said, I represent Angelina Jolie, and she would love those. Can I get some? A year later, my business partner called me and said, you have to come over here immediately. So I thought he was dying, so I ran to his house. He had 6 magazines, OK, In Style, People, Us, all opened up on his daybed. And it was Angelina Jolie walking out of a toy store in Malibu in every single magazine, and she was wearing our jeans. And the next show we did, I had all these people running to our booth saying, are you that Angelina Jolie brand? And I was like, uh-huh. So, you know, Monica and I have talked a lot about visualization and creating what you want and then going after that specific thing. But that literally put us on the map, because a year before that, I had gone to that luncheon with an intention. I'm very intentional about everything I do. People think I'm crazy. People are like, oh, whatever, California. I'm like, hey, works for me. But
And crazy's okay.
Crazy's okay. And you know, Monica's book it talks about that. It talks about how you can create what you want by simply thinking about it and then taking action towards that goal. So,
yes, Susie's story is an important one because, you know, we hear a lot about women not growing their businesses, and they speculate that it's because of financing. Maybe they don't have access to capital. But then you talk to women who dole out the access to capital, and they're telling you that the women aren't applying. And then you talk to people who cover hundreds of companies in the media, and they're telling you maybe it's training. But you know what? Women and their graduation levels from college and their education levels rival that of men. And so when you take 2 steps back and you think about, we've got the education, we've got the capability to go after the cash if we want it, maybe it comes back to mindset, and maybe it comes back to fear, and it's the thing that we don't talk about a lot. And it's not to say that if you start a business, you better grow it to $100 million. You can do whatever you want. But for the women out there that are looking at the women next to them, and the ones who are starting businesses and seeing that they just don't have that many role models next to them, in front of them, of women who have found big time success with their small business, come back to the fear factor, come back to the mindset, and understand that it can be more powerful than, you know, all the training in the world and all the access to capital in the world. The mindset's important.
I think also one of the things that I think about a lot is I had to get really comfortable with my own ambition, and that it didn't make me unsexy, it didn't make me unfeminine, it didn't make me unawesome, it just made me an ambitious woman. You don't have to become a man to want to be a successful woman. So I really had to cozy up and own my own ambition.
Laurel, I'd love to get your thoughts on just goal setting. Are women thinking too small when it comes to starting businesses?
I do worry about that. I worry that the reason they're not going after capital is that they're just not interested in growing an empire. They're interested in replacing income and having control over their time. And that's okay. But, you know, those women aren't here, I guess, at the Scaling Up panel. None of you guys are like that, right? So I agree with Susie about the vision thing. I mean, the same thing happened with me. I was single-minded. I had a vision, and I could see it working, and I could see the steps I needed to take. And I just simply started moving in that direction and wouldn't let anything stop me. And, you know, just pursued everything in that single-minded way. But, yeah, I could go on and on.
You do have to remember you're going to be tested. Okay, you're going to be tested. I mean, when you talk about single focus and whatever, I do want to be perfectly clear. I mean, when I started green, which was a color at the time, I was physically arrested and thrown out of buildings. So in handcuffs, which is a wonderful picture because I also had a child, to be able to say and stand up with what I believed on. And I'm sure each one of you were tested along the way to say, do you really believe in what you're doing? Because if you don't believe 2 feet in, right, like you're pregnant or you're not pregnant, you're married or you're not married, there's no areas of gray. You either believe in what you're going to do or you do not. And if you're not 2 feet in, then don't think you're going to have 2 feet success. You're going to have wishy-washy success. So you have to believe visually, mentally, spiritually, physically, and surround yourself with people who also believe. And if they don't believe, move them away. Because it takes that much conviction, that much of saying, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that and I'm saying no. And if you can't be my friend because I didn't go to the birthday party, you don't get me. And in that belief and in that conviction, the universe will open up with the visualization, whatever, and bring you what you need. They'll bring the omens and the stepping stones in front of you. If you commit, the rest of the world will commit. But do not believe you will not be tested. You'll be tested like you have no idea.
One of the things we heard, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that there's a lot in the press right now about the pivot, right? And how important it is to an investor to settle on the right team and bet on the right team, because if there's something wrong with their idea, the team can pivot and go after another idea, and you still got a great team. And I see that in certain models of entrepreneurship that can work. I think overall, that is not the way you go and build a great company. It absolutely is not. It may be the way that you have a great exit for a certain set of investors, and if that's your goal, then like go for it, fine. But when I look at people who are really, really successful, a good part of the reason these entrepreneurs are successful is because they're contrarians. That's their role, right? We're doing a newsletter called One Thing New. We see this as the first step to basically taking over the world in media. Now, you all guys are all going to laugh at me, and that's fine. You know, there are plenty of people who would hire me and who have hired me to help execute on their vision of media. That's not exciting to me. That's not why I'm in the game. And I don't think it should be for anybody else either if you're in this room. The other thing that really sticks in my craw that I just have to mention because it's come up kind of sideways in a couple conversations is this idea that women start businesses for a lifestyle advantage. And that definitely is true. But there are a lot of men who start businesses because they want to have a better lifestyle as well. The numbers may be higher for women, but there are enough women who start businesses that even if you take out everyone who is running a so-called lifestyle business and only look at the women who want to take over the world, we ought to be doing a lot better. Like there is something bigger wrong with the system and women's ability to have world-beating companies than just that a large percentage of them are looking for a better lifestyle. Because there's plenty of men who do that too. And that doesn't stop the other 10, 15, 20, 40% from having success like gangbusters. So I don't want that to be like an excuse in anybody's head. Well, the reason more women don't do well is because they're starting lifestyle companies. Plenty of men start lifestyle companies too, and nobody has a problem with it.
Do you feel like more women start businesses based on what they're good at versus what the market's looking for?
I don't know about start businesses. I do see that women tend to do better in consumer products than in B2B. And I don't know if there's a link there or not.
Investors definitely fund companies based on what people know and the acumen they bring to the table. So there's definitely something that plays a role with.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
here's
I mean,
two
if
good
you
examples.
wanna-
I mean, you didn't know anything about jeans or design, and I didn't know anything about soap at all. So, I mean, we didn't know, but we
Susie was
mastered
shopping
it.
in
We
the
mastered
stores,
it.
so
We
I
she
knew
learned it.
about clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, but
But
if somebody
I
said to
did
you,
not know
were
anything
you
about
the expert on
manufacturing
jeans?
and-
Yeah,
I
and
think
I didn't know anything about soap, but I knew that there was a problem, and I knew it fixed my own family. I learned about manufacturing. I learned how to make soap. I learned it, but I will tell you, if you would have asked me, were you going to grow up and have one of the first soap companies? No. Or any of the other companies. I mean, I did pharmaceutical too. If you would have said, was I going to be in charge of a pharmaceutical company? No, I know nothing about it. Or construction or whatever. I didn't know, but like you, I was saying I had enough to know there was something there, and I was tenacious to know to go, I will be the end-all, be-all expert in soap or whatever. I learned it quick and fast because I was focused, but not because I ever wanted to grow up and be it, or that I ever was schooled in it, or anything else. So
Women are finding inspiration in all sorts of places.
Yes.
And I think with our limited time left, I want to steer the conversation to mentorship, because I think that's something that came up earlier. And, I've had mentors in my life, but I don't think they've known they were my mentors. And to find a proactive mentor, that's been a challenge. So I would love to hear where the women here have found inspiration, how they found guidance, and what advice you have for everyone out there in terms of finding that, that great advice.
I'll start with a story that's not my own, but comes from another woman in my industry who was doing a media startup. And there was one other woman in this little slice of media land who had had huge, huge success. And basically everybody wants her on their board. Like, it's a no-brainer. You do your research, you find her pretty quickly. You're like, okay, this is the person I need. She had a great exit. You need her. So she calls her up. Nothing. Emails her. Nothing. Months go by, right? Routinely, 2 times a week. She'll try to contact her. Nothing happens. Finally, her assistant gets back to her. Says, if you want a return call, it's going to cost you $5,000. Not, I'm going to have lunch with you for $5,000. Not my consulting fee is $5,000 an hour. If you want a return call, it's going to cost you $5,000. I said to her, so what did you do? She goes, I gave her $5,000. Like, what was I going to do? I gave her $5,000, right? So she has a conversation with this woman and says, and they talk about her business, and this, mentor-y type person says, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z. That's it. So this entrepreneur goes, she does X, Y, and Z. And the would-be mentor is like, oh, she can actually execute. You need to do D, E, and F. She goes back, she does it. After consistently showing her that she could execute, that her advice was going to be taken seriously and acted upon, she eventually got this woman on her board. She's the only person who has ever got her on her board. Now, it's not always this.
Who is this? Wenda Harris?
I don't want to say who it is.
Wenda Harris Millard?
No, it's not. It's not. No. I think she's probably given her some equity in addition. But the point about that story is not that it always starts with $5,000, because it doesn't also always start with weeks and weeks and months of cold calls, right? I mean, those are the two things that are extraordinary or different about that story. Is one, that she was trying to contact someone out of the blue, and two is the $5,000. But the part about it that I think applies to everyone is something that Amy Millman calls "show me the movie." Right? In that if you go up to someone and say, I want you to be my mentor, they're going to like run away screaming, right? But if you have a specific problem with your business and you know there's a specific person who can help you with it, and you can devise a way to meet them or a way to have coffee with them and explain to them and say, look, I've got this one thing, it's really tough, you've been through this, what do you have to say to me? Is there anything you would say to me? And then you come back to them and you've done it. And then a couple months later, you do the same thing, and you've taken their advice and you've done it. Very slowly, you're getting them vested in the success of your company. And you've never gone up to them and said, would you be my mentor? But that is, in effect, if you continue to get along with them and if you continue to take their advice and show that you can use it, you will start to surround yourself with people who, in effect, are your mentor.
Laurel, you spend a lot of time in technology, and technology is a little bit different in that meetups are common. There's places for you to meet other entrepreneurs. What are other ways that women can get advice from others?
I find getting advice on the fly is a lot better and just as effective than stalking people, through social media, et cetera. Just going to events and showing up and pulling somebody aside and saying, hey, you do this kind of company. Can you give me some thoughts on XYZ problem I'm having? Or maybe so-and-so who is also in our industry who does XYZ. I mean, I don't like that whole, will you be my mentor? It reminds me of like, will you be my mommy? It's just it's horrifying.
We're jumping to Q&A, but if there's quick advice, we'd love to hear it.
Well, one thing I just want to add to what Kimberly and Laurel said is, often, people approach mentors, and I think one of the effective strategies was to think of it as a two-way street. Yeah. So it shouldn't only be what can your mentor do for you, it's kind of what you can do for your mentor. And I just think that in life in general, that's kind of an attitude that will get you a lot further, is my impression.
Yeah, it's all about power. You don't want to give power up. You're a powerful person too. You're going to be a success too. So yeah, you don't want to look up to them. You want to look straight at them.
Amelia, how did you find guidance with everything you've done?
I mean, it's an investment. If you have a relationship, therapy is an investment. If you've got a business, mentorship is an investment. We'll invest. I definitely believe on the return, because again, unfortunately, a lot of people, I say something to you and you don't do anything with it. So it gives a bad taste in somebody's mouth when you expense time, energy, and effort, and then you find out that it went on deaf ears. But I will give you a good tip: SCORE. If you have not heard of SCORE.org, that is your best friend right now. SCORE, SCORE. What it is it's retired executives. They're all going to be, 65 and older, who all come from very powerful careers. So one of the very first companies, because again, I was 17 years old, what did I know? I sat down with somebody who explained to me where the spreadsheet, what's a P&L, what's cost of goods, what are these things? And I sat and went to, it's a nonprofit organization, costs you nothing. If you don't like the chapter here in New York, try Jersey, try Connecticut, try it around you, because it's chapter by chapter. You only get whatever's in that chapter. So one chapter may be fantastic, the other one not so much. It's a fabulous organization, and it's full of resources, wealth, experience, knowledge. Use it.
So we'd love to open up the floor to questions. Does anyone have questions? Right there.
My name's Ashley, and I have my own business. And my question is, when do you know you're at the point to start asking for funds from an outside investor? And, I mean, do you go to a bank first, or do you go to VC?
What kind of business is it, please?
It's fine jewelry. So I have a small loan from a bank, but I'm hesitant to use it because I'm afraid to borrow, like you said. So because it seems to me with VCs, they want a really large return. And so with fine jewelry, it's not something that's worth giving up. But when do you know that it is worth giving up?
Well, so let me give, so Soapworks, which is obviously very expensive to try to get. I did an SBA loan. I was laughed at VCs. I maxed out 51 credit cards, put myself $1.8 million in debt. So I'm very comfortable with being in debt.
Not afraid to borrow.
Not at all. So first of all, don't consider debt for business. That is an investment, so get comfortable with it. Because if you can get comfortable being $100,000 in debt and a line of credit, then you're going to be able to use that line of credit for $200, $300, $400. My trigger point for you is this. Go as far as you can possibly go, because the first one in is going to take the most, okay? So friends, family, get creative, leverage. I'll tell you this again. If you're manufacturing, like I manufactured, use your manufacturers as investors. Extend those terms beyond 120 days. I extended my manufacturer 6 months of taking in goods, flipping it around, and then collecting on the cash. It was very, very smart. Cash is king. So learn how to use a dollar and use it wisely. When is the very last hour before I have to pay this? Right? Not day, not week. I can put it in the mail on this day, and what will happen? So get comfortable with money. And again, this is where you want to get a really good mentor or somebody who understands that. Don't think you're going to get one mentor who's going to help you everyone. Get a mentor for finance. Get a mentor for logistics. Get a mentor for your relationship. Get a mentor for your kids. Get a mentor. I have a team for everything. I do nothing alone. I do not wake up. I do nothing alone. I have a team for my toddler. I have a team for my teenager. I have a team for business. I have a team for myself personally. I have a team for everything. Build them and learn to manage them. If you can run a household, you can run a business.
I would add 2 things to what Amelia is saying. Don't bother getting a loan until you can show that you can actually pay it back with your cash flow. And as far as venture capital goes, don't bother unless you can show a lot of growth, because they're only looking for companies that can show that exponential horizon that makes it worth their while to take a risk on your company. More questions back there.
I have 2 quick questions. My name's Joni. Do you believe that it's important to go through all of your own money and be maxed out on all your credit cards and your savings before you ask for money? And the second question is to Susie. You were a waitress until you were, I don't know what you said, 34?
34.
And now you were saying about how ambitious. What changed you from being a waitress to being somebody who labels yourself as being extremely ambitious and proud of it?
That's a good question. I didn't want to be a waitress anymore. I had been a waitress for 10 years. I was tired of it. And I became, from waitress, I went to wardrobe stylist. And then 6 years after that, I saw that there was no future in it. And really, when I started J-Brand, when I put that jean on, that first sample, I knew that I wanted to be a financially independent woman, period. I know several of my friends who've gone through terrible divorces and they have no money. They can't take care of themselves. I never wanted to be that. And this all happened after the fact. But I wanted to be financially independent. And I always was. I just was never financially independent to the point that I am now.
The only thing I'd say on the credit card financing is I think that there's one point that I would like to, on behalf of the people who do provide financing, is a lot of times they bring value to the table. And so you don't necessarily have to max out all your credit cards. We really want to see that you're invested, that you're passionate, and that you're going to be participating in the upside with us. And so I think seeking outside financing is a good thing to do if you can find the right people who are going to be supportive of your vision and passion.
I'm afraid that we've run out of time, but I want to thank this exceptional panel for taking time out and sharing all of their ideas, and thank you for listening.